Hey guys, welcome to Fascio Podcast, episode 11. We're going to be talking with an former IDF veteran, so that's going to be a pretty interesting show. Before I have everybody introduce themselves, I'm just going to say, even though I'm taking a hiatus, I'm still going to appear on the podcasts every now and then if we have somebody interesting who wants to come on and talk. And I also have a couple things that are already recorded that Anon's going to be working on over time. They won't be dropping immediately. But yeah, I'll just let Anon introduce himself.
Shalom, everyone.
Just like Cowboy, I guess.
I'm going to go by the name of Angry Cowboy for the duration of the stream. I wanted to start off with a few caveats. I may be a IDF veteran, and yes, I happen to technically also be Jewish, but I've more or less walked away from both the state of Israel and the Jewish religion. So if anyone thought I was coming here to Zio, shill, and suck Israel's dick and be a Jewish apologist, that's not what I came here to do at all. And in fact, if I could go into, generally my life story real quick, I was born and raised in the American South. I was born and raised a Christian and not Jewish at all. I always thought of myself as like a Southern boy. I had a lot of a pride in this, my Southern heritage and all that stuff. And my dad, he would go through different phases. My dad had a neo-Nazi phase actually, just before he had me. And then when he was, I guess when he got my mom pregnant, he turned his life around. I guess did Rastafarian phase and did the whole dreadlocks and the Bob Marley thing. It's kind of weird. And then he had like I guess after that he had like an old Western phase where he just shaved off his dreadlocks, grew a mustache, and watched only Westerns. And then finally he had like his Jewish phase where I guess it started off when I was like 12 or 13. And that lasted quite a long time. So I was pretty much along for the ride. And my parents basically brought us to the Orthodox Jewish community to convert, which is a very, very long process. Even if you do everything right and you suck all the dick, it takes like 5 years at least to, finally, become Jewish. And even then, whether or not you're truly accepted is a whole other, scenario. So 5 years, fast forward to the time where I'm 15 or 16, they send me off to yeshiva to learn all the minutia of Jewish law and biblical stuff, and I spend several years learning Hebrew, Aramaic, all that sort of stuff. And then eventually I grow restless. 18 years old. I kind of want to figure out what I want to do with my life, but I want to go off and have an adventure. And then it just got to the point where one of my friends recommended this school I go to in Israel. I'm like, you know what? I kind of want to see the world. I'm young, I'm healthy, I ain't got nothing better to do. So I went off to Israel to attend this school where it was like a community center. I got to be exposed to Israeli culture and something called the Dati Lomi movement, which I want to talk about later. But they encourage like nationalism, military service. They're like very patriotic, kind of right wing as far as like Israeli politics go. So they put it in my head that it was a good idea to basically get citizenship. And then when I got citizenship, I got drafted and I went to combat infantry, saw some action there. And after 2.5 years of that, I got out in like 2016 is when I got out, right after Operation Protective Edge. And by that time, I was just done with the country. And, I vacationed, I partied a bit, but then, pretty much left. I'm like, you know what? America's way better. Peace.
It's an amazing story, really. It is. I was wondering if you could tell me a bit more about the conversion process for, I guess Gentiles or non-ethnic Jews or well, Jews, Jews to be, I suppose. Could you tell me more about the conversion process?
Yeah, it's not something you would want to go through. They make it very unpleasant. They make it very uncomfortable, and you sort of have to like do these. You gotta have to show up and do all this volunteer work for the community. You have to slowly get acclimated to like what they do. You might get invited, a couple times to people's houses to have a Friday night dinner with them, which is Friday night to Saturday night is something called Shabbat, which is for them like a very holy day. So, you have it as a guest in people's house, and it takes a long time to get accepted. It's, if it's like there is something to be said about like the Jews having like this club that's hard to get into, because it really is fucking hard to get into. And after a lot of time and a lot of money, and of course losing all our former friends and opportunities, 5 years later you get to do the actual conversion itself, which is extremely uncomfortable and embarrassing. You have to okay, this is gonna kind of get graphic for people who like are kind of sensitive, but you have to strip naked actually, and be in a room with three rabbis looking at you. And normally they would have to circumcise you at that point. But I was already circumcised from birth. So what they do instead is they take a needle and they, prick your manhood down there as a way of still drawing blood. And then you go and you immerse yourself in water, kind of like a baptism. You submerge yourself completely in this water. And then you get up and you recite a few verses. I forgot what it was. It was such a long time ago. And then basically, and also before you submerge, they all ask you, are you sure you want to do this? This is, once you do this, you can't undo this. You'll always like be Jewish. It's not something you can stop being Jewish, even though I kind of disagree with that. But they once that is completed, it is what it is. You walk out, get dressed, and that's it. But whether or not like you're actually accepted as a member of the community, can depend on a lot of things. If you're caught, breaking Shabbat or not keeping kosher and all that stuff, you can still be ostracized. So
yeah, one question I had was like, what is? I'm sorry, Zoltanous. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I was gonna ask him. You said like your dad went through a phase where he kind of drug you into it. Do you know why he made you guys all convert to Judaism?
From what I understand, it's so we used to go to a very pro-Zionist church. It's a huge one. I'm not going to say the name, but it's an internationally known one, and they preach a lot about Israel, the Hebrews, and all that stuff.
Evangelicals strike again.
Yeah, pretty much. But so it had a lot of people from that particular church going into the synagogues and going, well, what is it all about then? Because if you're going to say these people are like, the OGs that were wandering around the desert, then like, I want to see what it's all about. So we had quite a few people from this particular church come into our synagogue over the years. That's actually how I met my ex. She was also a member of that church. So we went through the same thing together pretty much. It was kind of interesting, like just as a side note, like Jewish girls are kind of like, I don't know, very needy and like, I don't know, like I never really got along with actual
Might be the
Jewish
inbreeding.
girls. Yeah, all my
That's a
girlfriends
joke.
were either like all my girlfriends were either like not Jewish or not religious. But that's another conversation. But
one question I had was like, what is the perception of converted non-ethnic Jews in the rest of the Jewish community?
it depends on the community. Some communities are more accepting than others. For the most part, I think you'll find that they don't have so much of an issue with it, other than like if you're like let's say you're just like straight up black, you might have to go it might take you longer. Like I knew a black guy, it took him 10 years to convert. And then even then, they probably want you to hang out with what's called the Sephardi Jews, which are the Jews east of Europe for the most part.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, you have two main camps. You have the Ashkenazis, which are like the Western European kind of Jews, and then you have the
Mhm.
Sephardis, which are Spanish, Middle Eastern, Latino, and African.
Uh,
Spit.
how is your views? Because like since your family converted, like how has your views like on Judaism changed? Because like you were raised to be devout in it after your family converted. How have your views changed on it?
Several things. I just don't like the victim culture of a lot of Judaism, a lot of Jews. I don't like their outlook on life when it comes to like the prioritizing of nation building and how they go about that. Because Judaism today, a lot of it is the result of like the diaspora, the 2,000 years when they were, kicked out of Israel, and they don't have really much experience in like nation building. They have mostly been academic types, and there's a big emphasis on just studying Torah all day, every day, and not doing anything else. There's a faction of Jews called the Haredim that are in Israel, and they refuse to get jobs, and they refuse to basically do anything other than study all day, and they get welfare to do it, and it's like it's all the negative stereotypes about these Jews because they only marry members of their own community. They never go outside, so they look like just inbred like mutants. And I'm like, I don't want to have anything to do with these people. Um, on the other hand, there is like a new movement that's breaking a lot of these stereotypes called the Dati Lomi movement that I mentioned earlier, and they kind of arose out of the people going actually back to Israel and starting to actually work the land and actually have to build a nation. So you saw with the Lomi movement that they broke away big time from like the victimhood mentality. A lot of them, they farm, they have weapons, they live very much a lifestyle that a lot of people in America kind of would have thought the 1950s were like. They're very family oriented. They don't take any BS from outsiders, and they're very capable people. And I'll tell you right away that even though they are patriotic, they're still despised by the Israeli government as being, right wing sort of fanatics, because Israel deals with a lot of the same problems we deal with in terms of like this weird globalist sort of cabal of like these left wingers who just are destroying national interest in favor of like this weird oligarchy. So like a lot of people have this misperception that like Israel is at the center of like the new world order and that Israel gets to have everything done for its own best interest, but Israel has a lot of politicians who are just like in America, their main interest is for themselves. They don't really care about the nation, and I would argue that like the left wing uh, nonsense is even more intense there. Like I used to be working with this right wing party there that was teaching against like intermarriage. They basically came out against Jews marrying Muslims and Muslims marrying Jews, and the whole party was shut down by the government as
I heard they used to have like anti-race mixing laws for a while too when it came to Jewish people.
If they have any laws, I don't know about it. In fact, they have anti-racism laws where like if you're like racist or whatever, they can charge you with a hate crime. So
What would
they
you
don't really
say
have.
about them? Because I know like there's like a group of like blacks that converted to Judaism, or at least claim they're Jews, and a lot of them went to Israel, and the state of Israel has been actively deporting them or trying to get them to go over to Europe.
If you're talking about the Hebrew Israelites, they're a bunch of retards.
Uh, I believe like the Black Israelites are different. These were like a group of people from Ethiopia.
So there's a very large Ethiopian Jewish presence in Israel. They're not really being deported. The people who are being deported are the refugee seekers because they're ruining the country. They have like mostly Eritreans, Somalis, Sudanese. They for a while they were just rounding them up at the border and shipping them up to Tel Aviv, and that it turned Tel Aviv into a big shithole overnight. I mean, Tel Aviv has always been kind of a shithole because it's the San Francisco of Israel. So, it's basically exactly having the same problems like, it's overrun with gays and migrants and really far left people. Um, and it was actually kind of based to punish them with all these migrants that then turned around and were just like raping people and robbing people. But yeah, I think like tens of thousands of them wound up getting shipped back because people were like, okay, this is nonsense. But as for like actual like deportation of blacks from Israel, um, no, I served with a lot of Ethiopians, and they were never in any danger of being deported. And if they were, it would be more like a citizenship thing. Now, I will say that there is more of a focus in Israel to attract Anglos to Israel. Like they want immigrants from America, Canada, England, Europe, that sort of thing, because there's an understanding that they're going to come there and be productive. So you have entire organizations that are set up to specifically help only those people. There might be separate organizations that I don't know about to help out, the Africans, but I wasn't involved in it. I don't know about it.
Yeah, weren't there actually a lot of Europeans in your unit specifically?
So Israel has its own version of the French Foreign Legion,
Mm-hmm.
where foreigners who aren't citizens can join under certain circumstances. I wound up being transferred to that unit, even though I didn't qualify because I was an actual citizen. But I got tired of being around the actual Israelis, and I wanted to be around the Europeans. So after a lot of hammering and hollering, I finally got transferred to what's called the Mahal unit. And Mahal is basically the Foreign Legion, where they put everyone who's not acclimated or considered a native. So I served with a lot of let's see, there's guys from Germany, um, France, Russia, uh, Ukraine, Holland,
Mm-hmm.
England. I knew a couple guys from England, so it was an interesting experience.
It sounds like it really was. Can you tell me like what was the mindset of some of these guys that they were wanting to go to Israel, and were they wanting to be like Jews themselves?
Well, here's the thing. It's kind of really interesting. None of them were particularly religious.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it came from the fact that like a lot of Western countries now, they're losing their nationalistic pride or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's falling out of style to, like join the army and do all that stuff. And a lot of these young men felt like maybe joining the IDF was like their big adventure into manhood that they wouldn't necessarily get out of their native countries. I mean, because what are you going to join the British Army and do at this point?
True. Like, don't IDF soldiers actually see action a lot more often than, say, an American soldier?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, I saw plenty myself. I can go into what I did specifically in a little bit, but yeah, you can join the American Army, and the chances are you're going to be deployed to, Germany. You're going to get deployed to Japan, maybe Korea, but even there, nothing really happens. And I know guys, friends of mine who are in the American Army, 5, 6, 7 years, they don't see any action. Not that war is good or anything like that, but if you're going to, join the army, you want to do army shit. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot to be done. Now, don't get me wrong. There's plenty of people who do absolutely nothing in the IDF too. In fact, our particular unit saw some of the most action because we were stuck down in the West Bank. My first deployment was around was sort of near Jenin, more specifically in a near Arab village called Yabed. We had some interesting things happen there. Then my next deployment was on near Ramallah, which is near the center of Israel is the capital of the Palestinian Authority. And then my next deployment was in an area known as 443, which is somewhere in the mountains outside Jerusalem. And there was quite a bit of interesting things going on there as well. So, we could talk about the kind of stuff that happened there if you want.
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to ask too, because like I do have some friends that are actually from Palestine, so like I want to know what your thoughts are like on Palestinians actually are.
Well, am I allowed to use swear words on stream?
I would
Yes.
try not to.
Oh, okay.
Please.
Yeah.
If it's like stuff that violate TOS, please don't.
say you can say as many aggressive things against Palestinians as long as they are not curse words.
Yeah, like we're not really here to like completely deconstruct everything, but like most people come on the show, I'm just trying to get them on so they kind of hear what they're saying and what they think. I don't have to necessarily agree with you or support you.
And on top of that, your experience is also very valuable because you interacted firsthand with these people, which cannot be said for a lot of people who are talking about these problems.
So if I'm going to try to be somewhat polite, I would say that I saw a lot of similarities between the relationship that the Palestinians had with the IDF and the relationship that Black Lives Matter here in America has with the police. Which is to say, look, they're gonna come at it with, we've been historically wronged, right? Both BLM and the Palestinians both believe that. But then they turn around, they use that as justification to burn shit, stab random people, cause a general scene, riot, and then they provoke this like response. And then when we respond, they turn on all the cameras and go, look how these people treat us. And with every case of Israeli police brutality, which exists, it really does. With every case of that, I can show you something they do that's even dumber. Like, forget the way the Israelis treat them; they treat each other piss poorly. There's a book that was written it's called Son of Hamas, and it talked about a guy who was raised by, he's a Palestinian raised by a prominent Hamas member, and his slow journey to realize the whole situation is a bit more complicated than he thinks. Now, that being said, there are no real good guys in this situation. Israel is fairly corrupt itself. I regard it as a somewhat socialist regime, which is why I do not like or support the current Israeli government in its form. But that being said, the Palestinians are not the victims they pretend to be. And if Israel were to go away tomorrow, like just completely disappear, like all the Jews there completely disappear, best case scenario, Israel would turn into another Syria where, warring factions of the Muslims would kill each other over it. Which, they can't even get along in their current state against Israel. Like, Hamas is having problems with Fatah, and which is having problems with the PLO. There was actually one instance where there was when I was stationed near Ramallah, there was an actual uprising against the Palestinian Authority. And they said there was a good chance we were going to have to be sent in there to assist the Palestinian Authority against the Hamas uprising, which was fucking crazy. But
I believe as far as like elections actually go, if Hamas is actually kind of barred from doing anything electorally, but as far as like polling goes with Palestinians, I believe Hamas would actually be in charge. It's right around 70% approval. Do you have any views on that?
That's why they're in charge of Gaza, because we gave Gaza over to them and said, do whatever you want with it. And they elected Hamas. Now, it's different in the West Bank because, at least on paper, the people who run the Arab territories in the West Bank are called the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian Authority is kind of like, they're not like their own country or anything, but they are kind of like a vessel that...
It's like an autonomous zone.
Yeah, and the Palestinian Authority is set up as a way for Israel to interface with these autonomous zones because we need like a network to contact with if we have issues with what's going on. So even though members of the Palestinian Authority and us, we fight physically all the time, we still have to work, quote unquote, with them, and we do sometimes security tours together. But there's been a lot of missions, dude, where we'll hit the house, we'll get the terrorist, and he's right across the street from, a PA police station. So, it's a really weird relationship that we have with the Palestinian Authority. But the Palestinians in general are, from what I gather, and look, I'm no academic type, so I'm just speaking from what I've seen. They're not very well liked by their Arab neighbors. They have refugee camps, I believe, in Jordan and Lebanon, and they're not really made to feel welcome because I don't know, they're regarded as sort of like they're not really trusted, and they don't behave in a way I would consider reasonable or rational, and they destroy themselves constantly. Like I said, it's a lot like BLM here.
Well, a lot of the Palestinians, like I think you've mentioned before, are like recklessly destructive to themselves and others. Like one event that you mentioned is that they like to throw stones at passing by vehicles.
Yeah, they'll do stuff like that. They'll randomly destroy. They like to attack citizens a lot because each time they try to go after soldiers, they get themselves killed. So there were plenty of instances. In fact, there was one very infamous incident called the Fagol family incident, where two Palestinians snuck into a home while his family was sleeping, and they stabbed the mother, father, and three of their kids to death. And this was hailed as like a heroic act by the Palestinians. So, I can't really understand that frame of mind because, even if I felt like wronged by a certain group of people, I can't imagine like just sneaking into a family's home and just stabbing everybody to death. And and look, like I said, you know, there bad things happen, on the Israeli side. I remember one time we had the military police show up to the base, and they went to our sergeant. They're like, "Hey, you need to give us your gun right now." And he's like, "Why? What happened?" They're like, "Just give us your gun." And so he turned in the gun. They said, "By the way, your brother was just killed in a stabbing attack in Jerusalem. So we're gonna take you home, and you probably won't be able to serve in this unit because of emotional issues." So, like normally, the way it goes down, if your family is killed in a terrorist attack, you're pulled off of combat because they fear like you may get crazy with your gun. And then what happened? This was during like a stabbing spree that was going around, and we were kind of mad from that. And then we found out these other guys were planning another stabbing attack, and we picked them up. I think it was 4 guys. We picked them up before they had a chance to go through with it, and they were let's say mistreated. And I try to separate myself from that because look, I'm the first guy to want to fight, in a fair fight. But if the guys are like blindfolded and their hands are tied behind their back, I don't get any jollies off of, torturing them. So I established a very clear, whatchamacallit, when you're trying to be somewhere else. Why am I forgetting the word for it? Whatever. So I told my commander, hey, I'm going to be in this other part of the base, checking in on the guards, and I could hear later on that night, I could hear some screaming, and from what I gathered, electricity was involved. But the military police came back to our base, and they arrested so many guys that we had to shut down doing missions for a while. We had to get the paper pushers to do guard duty at the gate because they arrested so many people around that incident. So I narrowly managed to avoid that because I made sure I had a clear alibi, is the word I was looking for. I had a clear alibi.
I do have a question. So like as far as a lot of like the Palestinian animosity, one thing people bring up a lot is like the house and land theft, where you have a lot of cases of these Palestinian people being driven out of a house, and an Israeli group will go into the house and say it's theirs. and you have
Okay.
some where they have like land deeds still, but it's not really listened to. And there's a video footage of some of this stuff happening. What would your counterpoint to that be?
So, okay, it's a little more nuanced than that. So the Israeli government has a policy that if a territory is designated Area A, which is a Palestinian Authority area, Jews are not legally allowed to set foot there. They can't do it. They'll arrest you if you're a Jew and you walk into PA territory. Not to mention it's dangerous. So the fact that Jews would go into Palestinian territories and claim an individual house just to be surrounded by hostile neighbors is A, it's illegal, even in Israeli law. B, it's too dangerous for them to do. What you're probably talking about is the Israeli government does have a policy that if a family member of yours commits an act of terrorism, then the house they were living in gets destroyed as reprisal. And Israel made that policy in response to the PA having a policy that if your family member commits an act of terror, you get a stipend from the Palestinian Authority. You get paid a monthly payment. So it led to a lot of these people, committing acts of terrorism and being martyred so their families could get money. And then, basically to dampen that, the Israeli government destroyed the homes that the Palestinian committing terrorists lived in because they wanted to de-incentivize people to commit acts of terrorism, saying, you think you're going to come out ahead, economically, and you're not. Yeah, it's controversial, but it does go both ways. There's been plenty of times that Israel has gone in and kicked Jews out of their homes to give it to Palestinians. And actually, they tried to involve my unit in one such incident where it was around this town called Efrat. And they were going to, they started off by, taking Jews off the buses that were going into Efrat and sort of isolating it. And this was a job for something called the Magav and the Mistara, they do basically the dirty work for Israel. And they started approaching us and saying, hey, we need you to come and help, take Jews out of their homes. And we're like, no, we didn't join to do that. And they said, well, if you do that, we're going to arrest you. And then my platoon commander said, none of these guys have to obey a word you say. And if you try to come for us, we have guns and we'll shoot back. And then the police, didn't come back. But the Israeli government has kicked both Jews and Palestinians out of their homes. And they do it for different reasons. I mean, there's been sort of cases where some Jews know that they have a risk of getting kicked out of their homes if they live in like what's called a settlement, which is typically on disputed land. So it's not actual Palestinian Authority territory, but it was purchased from a Palestinian and the deed is being disputed. So those people know there's a risk they can get kicked off. But there have been several cases where they purchased land from Palestinian. It looked all good to go, and then they build an actual city on this land with actual buildings, and then later on it turns out they pull some Jewish shit. And what I mean by that is that there's an organization called Shalom Achshav, which is translates into Peace Now. And there are a bunch of liberal Jewish lawyers that go and they help out the Palestinians by disputing, land like that. And they always pull some Jewish trick to kick Jews out of their homes. It's pretty ironic.
What would you say to people who would bring up the Palestinian land area shrinking more and more over the years?
I would say I would give them the same lecture that a lot of the Palestinians from 1967 are kind of giving their young kids, where you actually have Palestinians that were living under Jordanian occupation and then Israeli occupation. And a lot of them are seeing that right now, the average life for your Palestinian is it's a lot better under Israeli occupation than it was under these other regimes. And you're allowed to be Muslim in Israel. You're allowed to work. You're allowed to vote. But if in Palestine, no Jew is allowed to set foot there in any of the PA territories. Even selling land to a Jew is will get you killed. So and we get people basically fighting with each other for work permits, even to work in Israel during the day and go back to the Palestinian territories during the evening, because they realize, oh shit, I can get paid a lot more and it's a lot better economically. And a lot of these Palestinians have to realize that like I said, if Israel were to go away tomorrow, they think they would get all their land back, but there'd be a power vacuum that Egypt would go into fill, that Lebanon would probably go into fill, Jordan would do God knows what, not to mention the various, militia groups, like
Well,
Hamas, Fatah.
initially in the past, the idea of what would fill this power vacuum, or at least unite the Arab nations, is a thing called the Ba'ath movement, and you kind of saw elements of that under Nasser. You see it still with Assad in power, and also Saddam, who isn't around anymore.
Yeah, but they don't.
Hezbollah, I believe, still identifies with the Ba'athist ideology.
Yeah, but they don't. In reality, like they don't even get along with each other. Like again, go back to BLM as an analogy. Like they might preach this unified message of we want what's best for our community, but when it comes down to it, these people are killing each other, stabbing each other, ruining each other's lives, burning down each other's houses.
Are you
They
talking
were
about the differences between like Sunni and Shia, for example, on religious
no,
grounds?
not even
Or
that. Like so someone I knew once called the Palestinians the N words of the Middle East, because that's how they act. They like I've seen families like fighting each other in the streets. And we had an incident that happened where one of one of the houses in one of the Arab villages burned down, and um, it was a national incident because when it burned down, it killed basically the whole family. And originally, they thought some Jewish extremists did it. So there was a big deal being made about it. Lots of Israelis coming out and condemning it, and people kind of jumping the gun and apologizing. But I was there. It happened in our area, in our district, and I happened to be working intelligence at the time. And so I got the first footage we had of it, and right away it didn't seem right, because the Hebrew writing on the wall looked like it was written by someone who writes Arabic, not Hebrew. And then, as it turned out, the house that burned down was not on the outskirts of the village, which is what you would attack if you were like if you're a group, you want to get in and out real quick. You hit the first house you see, but this was towards the center of town. So, and then there were no witnesses who saw anybody flee. So it got to be suspicious. Come to find out, it was just a rival Arab family that had a business dispute with them. And I've seen them riot, and sometimes when they riot, they randomly like turn on each other and fight with each other, and it's just a big mess. So it's where was I going with this? But basically like they make this deal like Israel mistreats them, and I guess there's something to be said about that. Israel mistreats its own citizens too. I mean, again, I'm not saying the Israeli government is good or even should continue in its current form, but I am saying that they aren't quite. It's not as one-sided as you would think it is, and they do a lot to provoke ire, including stabbing teenage girls to death. We had 3 teenage girls who were stabbed to death.
well, I can think of one that's not really about the current administration, but it's more like the administrations that founded Israel. Like one of them, the organization's the Lehi. The Lehi were like a national Bolshevik
Oh,
organization.
Lehi, yeah.
Yeah, they were also terrorists too. So like they would attack
Oh
the
yeah,
British
absolutely.
government and kill people and kidnap people. Same with several other organizations. One of them, who I can't remember the guy's name, but he was he was one of the prime ministers of Israel, and he sold some kind of toxic gas to Jews from Germany, and they were trying to poison the watering system that they were using for the West Germans after World War II, and to basically kill 6 million Germans using this poison gas. But these are like instances I can think of.
So right away, to speak to that, there's 2 books I recommend. One is called The Sword and the Olive. It breaks down like the general history of the IDF. And the second one is called The Massacre of Deir Yassin by Uri Milstein. And it really actually goes into the nuances of the Israeli army and the good and the bad. And the founding of Israel was absolutely horrible. And I would often get in trouble in class because they would try to. I went to their version of West Point, and they try to get you acclimated by teaching you all about Israel's history and all that. Come to find out, Israel was founded by Russian communists for the most part. So during that portion of the class, I was pretty loud in my condemnation of the founding fathers of Israel because they were a bunch of Soviet sympathizers and Russian communists. And Israel, up until 1967, was more aligned with Soviet Russia than it was anyone else.
Well, there was multiple different organizations. Some of them were pro-American. The Leahy were also initially pro, German, National Socialism, but then they switched over to the Soviet Union after the war.
So there
was also a couple other groups that engaged in these terrorist acts, but they didn't really identify with an ideology. They were just openly consider themselves like radical Talmudists.
There were four principal guerrilla groups before the founding of the IDF, or as they call it in Hebrew, Tzahal. The four principal groups were the Palmach, Irgun, Etzel, and Lehi. And it's been a long time since I bothered to read up on them, but the Sword and the Olive really goes into it. Some of them were more pro-British and try to work with the British to establish a Jewish state. Others were very anti-British, anti-anyone, basically, and just straight up committed acts of terrorism.
So how does Israel view the people who did these terrorist attacks? Because most of the times I've seen that these people are considered like heroes.
I personally despise them, but they are viewed as heroes for the most part.
What would you say about AIPAC, for example? Because a lot of people bring up Israeli influence in American diplomacy, for example. And there's also another one I want to bring up besides its influence within diplomacy and the parties. Cynthia McKinney, she's a black former congresswoman. She was actually kicked out of the Democrat Party when she was in office in Congress because she would not sign a paper swearing allegiance to Israel and to support them at AIPAC. Do you have anything the counter that stuff?
Well, first of all, I'm absolutely disgusted by the fact that people aren't allowed to speak out and criticize whoever they want to criticize. I'm totally against laws I'm totally against the government punishing people for being, anti-Israel. I think people should be anti whatever they want. And I really despise how a lot of these politicians suck off Israel and give billions of dollars to Israel when they don't need it, or they frankly they don't deserve it, because they're a socialist nation, and if they have money to be doing that, then they don't need extra handouts from us. So I totally condemn that sort of setup in the United States where you have to jerk off Israel in order to even participate in politics, and it's not something I like to see. And that being said, believe it or not, a lot of people in Israel have the opposite impression. There are some people in Israel who are sick of American influence in Israeli politics. There's a lot of kind of English speaking Anglos that are basically at the head of politics, and a lot of native Israelis see that as American influence.
Well, there's some guys I know from the post-liberal movement, which is people like Joel Davis believe in. They believe Israel is a state vassal of the United States and it's subordinate to the United States. I disagree respectively. I think Israel controls the United States, but
I think what it really is it's really neither. What it is, it's this weird global cabal, and they have an interest in Israel.
who is the global cabal?
Yeah, it's like I don't, like I don't know what word to use for it, but I don't. It's not. I wouldn't say it's just Jews. I'd say it includes other global interests too, that like sort of work with each other in slimy ways.
Yeah, there's another one for that. It's called the Anglo question because the Balfour Agreement that came out of England with the deal with Rothschild, which was a Jewish family that kind of set the Israel into eventually becoming a state.
Yeah, and that's the Palestinians call it Al Nakba, which is the disaster.
By the way, we did need to clarify again to anybody who's new because we do have some people rating too, and a lot of viewers. But yeah, this guy was not born Jewish. His family converted. What ethnicity are you actually?
Southern. I'm a
Uh,
Southern Confederate sympathizer.
oh, well, like by ethnicity, I mean like Celtic, like English, German, stuff like
So,
that.
yeah, I can only imagine the names they're calling me in the chat. Hey, how many of you can trace back your American lineage to the Pilgrims? My ancestor was the founder of Jamestown, and before that, we're talking like 1600s. My family were mostly English.
Eternal Anglo.
He, yeah, well, I mean, obviously, it's like, well, you did what any good Anglo does, and you
Yeah,
served.
Anglo's converting to Judaism.
You
It's like
convert to Judaism.
wait, Anglo-Israelism. The Anglo-Israelism. It's Christian identity. We Europeans are the real Jews.
we're the real
I'm
Jews.
fucking dead.
Sorry, go on. It's just a bit of a joke.
No, I'm about as I'm your typical like white American guy, like I said, there's really not a drop of actual Jew blood in me, which may lead to me thinking the way I'm thinking and not really, falling in line with what I was kind of told to fall in line with.
Well, you'd probably find this interesting. Most Jews aren't actually religious, and as far as like religiosity goes, interpreting the Talmud, most of the people who even follow the Talmud tend to be atheists or like deists, for example. Uh, Pastor Steven Anderson, he himself is actually racially Jewish, but he's like a Christian. He did a documentary called "Marching to Zion," where they went through that, and they don't follow the Torah, for example. They just follow the Talmud. And he was using it as a point to bring up that Jews actually hate Christ because in the Talmud it has all kinds of anti-Christian stuff in it.
Well,
Have you like ever read the Talmud?
the Jews do hate Christ. That's true.
Okay, so they do. So they do hate Christians then.
Maybe not Christians, but they don't like they don't. Some do. It's kind of like if you ask the question, do Christians hate Jews? Most don't. Like it's more like, do they hate the ideology? Probably. Um, Jews for the most part, when I hear them talk shit about Christianity, it's more about Jesus himself.
Well,
Uh,
I know in the Talmud, like I haven't read it, but I've heard verses or like sections of it read out in that documentary. There's even a book called it on it called Jesus in the Talmud. Some of the claims were is that his mother Mary was a whore, and that he was born
I've
as a
heard that.
bastard child from the Roman soldier Pantera who was hated by people, and that he's like burning and like fiery excrement.
Yeah, that's definitely there. There's a teaching that Jesus. So it's kind of messed up. Um, the Jews believe, for the most part, that hell, you're never there for more than 12 months. But there's been several exceptions, and one of them was Jesus. And they believe that he's one of the very few that are constantly there. And then his punishment was being, in a pit of boiling excrement.
What would you say about Purim? Because I know it's like a holiday for Jews, but most people will say that Purim is like a celebration of a genocide that they did of another people.
No, look, most of the Jewish holidays are boring as fuck, but Purim is actually the Jewish Mardi Gras, and on Purim, you're commanded to like drink and party and make people laugh. Um, the only celebration of death associated with that holiday is the hanging of Haman and his sons. But I've never heard of like this whole genocide they did that was being celebrated by Purim. Now, Purim is basically a Jewish holiday commemorating, I guess, life and liberation.
It's supposed to be
So,
like a genocide of a lot of Persians.
no, I've never heard that take before. I know that there was some sort of battle that they fought because of the king's decree, but as for killing Persians, that never took the forefront of the Persian holiday. I mean, the holiday of Purim, where people, for the most part, they just show up to party, get drunk, celebrate life. You wear costumes, you make people laugh. I mean, as far as the Jewish holiday goes, that is interesting that that one was the one that fell under suspicion because that's probably one of the more fun and wholesome ones. It's the others that aren't so fun to be a part of. It's probably the only fun Jewish holiday. All the others are boring as fuck.
So what would you say about blood libel? You ever heard of blood libel?
Yeah, the retarded thing about that is that Jews are forbidden to drink blood. They'd never do it. You're not. It's actually a very
Well, the
slippery
reason why I'm
slope.
asking is because like there is a documentary on it that actually claims there's specific groups of radical Jews that still engage in this, and there's actually some Catholic saints from the Middle Ages that were turned into saints because they died during blood libel.
So here's the thing. I've never heard of any Jew putting, if we're going to get specific, like blood in their matzah, because that, okay, there are several reasons why that's retarded.
Well, it's supposed to be. It's not groups that are like worshiping the Torah God. It's supposed to be groups that are still engaging in like they identify as Jewish, but the older pagan behaviors of like Moloch and Baal.
Well, you're not, look, when it comes to the matzah, right, there are several very strict laws around making the matzah. I actually worked in a matzah factory for a little bit. It was hell on earth. I hated it. But the matzah is not supposed to get any liquid in it at all after baking. And in fact, if it does, you're supposed to throw it out because it's not supposed to become leavened at all. Second of all, drinking any blood besides fish blood is absolutely forbidden in Jewish law, to the point where when we slaughter cows and everything, when we get to the meat part, we salt it pretty heavily to extract as much blood from it as possible because you're not supposed to have blood at all for the most part. You're really supposed to avoid it. So by Jewish law, you're not supposed to drink any blood, let alone human blood. I've never heard about it being practiced. Look, there's plenty of valid criticisms about Jews and Judaism, and
What about during circumcision?
So I've heard of the whole baby sucking thing. I've never seen it. I would never have gone to a synagogue where that happened. I don't. It's one of those things where I'm not too sure what to think about it because I actually wouldn't put that outside the realm of possibility. It's just that I've never seen it and I've never tolerated it. If I were to have seen it, I wouldn't have stayed in the synagogue where it happened. But for the most part, the mohel, who's the circumciser, he has tools for the job.
Here's another question. So as you know, like United States Israel close relationship. We also give them like a lot of cash, even in some cases our technology and some military related equipment. What do you think about Israel taking this like technology and military gear we sell them and then selling it to the Chinese and Russians?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. I mean, a lot of these Israel, like I said, it does some pretty fucked up stuff. When I was there in the Israeli military, a lot of our gear did come from America. In fact, my rifle that I used, it was M4. It had property of the U.S. government stamped on it. And
Oh, nice.
I remember we when we were halfway through training, they had us do this march overnight. We ended the march on top of this castle, on top of this mountain, which was, I guess, an old Crusader castle. And over there, they handed us our American gear, which was, new guns, new knee pads, new boots, and it was awesome. I love American stuff.
Yeah, well, so like I listen to FTN a lot, Fascination. They usually talk about like current events a lot, and like when I go on my hiatus, and every now and then I'm on the podcast. But when I'm at work, I'm going to be listening to FTN and TRS a lot. But uh, so like the way it works is like the technology usually gets sold, including the gear. And like China, as you know, like does spy in the United States and is pretty antagonistic to like Western liberalism. Not entirely pro-Chinese, but uh, Israel then turns around and like sends them the technology in exchange for integrating them into the Belt and Road project. So like the Belt and Road project is like this big thing that China is doing. It's going to incorporate a lot of countries into it to kind of make them like an economic the economic center of the world, I guess you could say. And they're kind of aligning more with Israel there. And you could probably make the argument that Israel is actually drifting towards China because it's starting to abandon its relationship with the United States. The United States is pretty much a dying empire.
So I have been told, and again, I'm not an academic type, but I have been told that in return for the large amount of aid that America gives Israel, America has exclusive access to some of Israeli tech, which, look, for all the criticisms we could lob at Israel, Israel's making some pretty out there stuff in terms of technology, and not all of it's good.
Well, it's the reason why they're able to is the United States it like basically subsidizes it, which the Israeli state gets the money from, and then they also use a lot of our technologies. We do technology sharing with them, and when they do make it, they sell it to the Chinese normally.
Most of that money that they get is turned around and used to purchase more American military stuff. But
I do know that they've stolen technology related to like hacking and encryption.
Well, I mean, the Pegasus software comes to mind, which has some pretty scary capabilities and would explain some of the stuff I saw when I was over there. I had towards the end of my service, I was moved to intelligence, and I had to sit down for a full day and be interviewed by the Shabak, which is their version of the FBI. And, basically took a 9-hour grill session, they interviewed in a room. And they knew things about my life that even I had forgotten. I'm like, how the hell do you guys know all this stuff? Pegasus would explain some of that. But yeah, it's scary stuff.
So what do you think about some of the stuff from like hacking and encryption? They've also been shown to be spying on the United States. That was actually a MSNBC article on that they ended up taking down. It was like a year ago, but they were spying on Americans through Facebook, and Facebook was giving them the information. And they were also working with the NSA to basically like tap into people and monitor. And they were also monitoring the people like me that are involved like in quote unquote like radical like nationalist third position politics.
We're going to have to start taking our national security a lot more seriously. I mean, look, I can tell you through experience that the Israeli intelligence apparatus is one of the most sophisticated and deep in the world. The Mossad and their hit squad, Keton, they
do hits on people all the time. They just never get caught doing it.
Well, I was gonna say the Israel has a very long arm, and you think they can't get to you, they can. And it's something we're gonna have to start taking a lot more seriously.
They almost got Scornazy too.
I wouldn't know anything about that, but
Scornazy was like a like former like Waffen SS commando. He like glided in and saved Mussolini when he was like held by the king, like took him out. He was kind of like heralded as a hero for that by the Germans, but like after the war, he kind of went in hiding, and then he was like in a bar, and this person went to talk to him, and he pulled a gun out, saying, "I know you're from the Mossad," and it turns out the guy was.
Yeah, when the Mossad wants to take care of you, they send in an elite unit known as Keton, which is the the top players from all their special forces are recruited into this unit, and it's got some really scary, dark shit that goes on. And the training that they do to initiate you in the unit will absolutely break you and make you like a robot for them.
Well, I could say something really interesting. So like Scorsese, his relationship with the Mossad was initially they were going to do a hit on him, but they ended up working with him to hunt down like other Nazis after the war. But when he ended up dying at his funeral, you had all these dudes that were alive during the Third Reich, and then he also had people from the Mossad at the funeral.
I was, you know, I've got to be careful with what I'm about to say, but there was a conversation I had about the Mossad with someone else in the military who kind of casually asked me about that. He's like, "Well, what if you were like approached by them?" And I'm not saying I was, but I'm saying what if? And I said I would just tell them to go fuck themselves. I don't want anything to do with those people, man. It's once you get involved with something like that, it's like joining the mob. You know, it's very hard to get out without getting yourself.
Well, it's because the Mossad is like it's like a culmination of all those like terrorist organizations that like were initially preceded Israel very briefly, like the Lehi and a bunch of other ones. So it's kind of like a giant crime syndicate that you could probably argue controls the state from the shadows, because most of the prime ministers actually came out of the Assad or were highly affiliated with the intelligence community.
Yeah, and like I said, it's sort of like over here where like, you know, the CIA is kind of more running the show than, you know, the actual president, and it's the people governing from the shadows. So over there, it's very much the same thing. We have Shabak, which is their version of the FBI. I worked with them pretty regularly. And then you have the Mossad, which I never directly interacted with because you typically don't know when you're interacting with them. But I have known some guys who may or may not have.
So I can tell you, like when I was in the military, I don't know if Anon told you, like during the Floyd riots, I was like on the internet and I basically like Fed posted about shooting up BLM. Yeah. And I ended up getting vanned by like the FBI, and it was even like a dude from the CIA that was there that were like looking into the shit. But
we had that happen all the time in my unit. Guys would get carried away. There'd be a terrorist attack, and they post on social media, "We're gonna get these fucks," and then military police show up, and guy gets put in jail for a couple weeks. It's sad, but
yeah, for me it was like solitary for like 7 days.
Yeah, that shit sucks, and it's a shame because they only censor, it seems, one side.
Yeah, like so like in the United States, as far as like Israel like doing the monitoring, it's mainly like on quote unquote far right organizations or like fascist organizations, and they kind of work with the US intelligence agencies, so like the FBI and the CIA, on who to monitor. And one of the organizations they actually use for this is the ADL with Jonathan Greenblatt. And like Greenblatt Greenblatt has said that if you criticize the state of Israel, it's anti-Semitism, stuff like that. That's like the Department of Homeland Security's official position. If you are like anti-Zionist, or if you criticize Israel, that's anti-Semitism.
Yeah, that's just fucking ridiculous. I hate the ADL, by the way.
What's your like actual problems with them, if you don't mind me asking?
That they like pretty much slander anyone who speaks out against Israel, and they attack freedom of speech, and then they basically make boogeymen out of pretty much nothing, and they just basically at the end of the day are there to ruin the lives of anyone to the right of Stalin.
So like I know like with the ADL, most of the big corporations in the United States are actually partnered with them, which is one of the ways that Mossad actually gets their information.
I mean, I wouldn't rule out corporate involvement in ADL at all. I mean, they're all, like I said, they all buddy up with each other. You know, the corporate elite and the political elite.
Well, this would probably be interesting since you were like initially involved in Judaism. Now, not so much. What have you ever heard of the Jewish question before?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, of course I'm going to ask you it, but like there's different takes on the Jewish question. So like the general consensus is it's kind of like a cabal of Jews, but it also different, I guess you could say elites in other countries to basically undermine and like globalize things. Uh, and I know you had like a movement like this in like Russia with like specifically communists who were Jews, and they believed that they were fulfilling the Torah, like the goals of the Torah, by globalizing the world basically. And this is something that you can hear from, of course, like you have like the modern interpretation is like through capitalism or like these big corporate conglomerates, like international things like BlackRock, George Soros, kind of like your usual suspects. And then you have more like a cultural and like anti-religious take on Judaism, which could come anywhere from like Catholics criticizing it as being anti-Christ and a part of deicide, or to people like Karl Marx, the communist guy, who's basically arguing that their culture is inherently narcissistic and capitalistic, and their religion needs to be destroyed for them to become international. Like, I know it's a big question, but what's your thoughts on these different takes on the JQ? Because like I personally do subscribe to it.
So, okay, so first of all, I want to clarify kind of where I come from on the political spectrum. I would be more akin to, I'm more of like a right wing, not exactly libertarian, but I like small government. I like capitalism. I know you have your own
Probably
thoughts
a
on that.
minarchist.
No, not exactly minarchist, because there are just certain things people shouldn't be allowed to do. I mean, the government is useful as like a third party. So when the government's very useful for telling people what not to do, but it's not. I never really liked the government telling people what they should do. So I have libertarian tendencies, but I also am very right wing in a lot of things. Um, and I do realize that there has to be some authoritarianism. Like, I don't know if you ever heard of the content creator Turd Flinging Monkey.
Yeah, he does a lot of porn toy reviews. That's why I avoid him.
Yeah, well, I like it. I kind of like his political views, and he talks about how he's very libertarian, but lately he's been getting to understand that when it comes to allowing communism and allowing people to preach against the values of your homeland, there actually needs to be a lot less tolerance for that, because you're allowing them to subvert your culture and subvert the things you believe, all because you believe in freedom, but they absolutely don't, and they will take your tolerance of freedom and use it to destroy your way of life. And I think in America, we should actually be intolerant of subversives. And it's not just the Jews, but there are some Jews that are included in it. But pretty much anyone who comes in here and starts trying to subvert our culture and way of life, they should not feel welcome here or tolerated for that. So I think there's a lot of the problem has gotten so out of control because we have been too tolerant. Um, So I don't think the solution is to go full spurg and round up all the K words and N words and F slurs and decibel. But I do think they need to understand that this is not their country primarily. That it is it's a country that we built, and if we want to keep it, we have to stand up for what we believe, and that means making sure our values survive and theirs do not. And in countries like Singapore, if you're, they're largely free market, but on the other hand, if you're caught subverting their culture, trying to divide people by, you know, getting them to hate each other or getting them to rebel against the system, you're absolutely punished for that. And I think that, maybe some of these people need to understand here, like, subversives should not be tolerated, but we tolerate a lot of this stuff.
What's your views on people who say that like communism is inherently Jewish? Because like you have Marx, comes from like a long line of rabbis. His mentor was a guy called Hess, and Hess created a thing called labor Zionism, which you're probably aware of from Israel. And then you also have many prominent people like Trotsky, for example, Yugoda, which is like one of the guys who's had like a heavy hand in the Holodomor. And then there's also people like Lenin had like some Jewish ancestry, stuff like that.
So, okay, there's a very big divide in the Jewish community between the secular Jews and the more Orthodox Jews. And I can tell you some of the worst Jews you'll ever meet are these radical left-wing secular Jews, and they're pretty much despised by a lot of their fellow Jews. So they have all kind of like formed their own group, and those are where a lot of the Hollywood communist liberal Jews are formed, and they're always doing shit like that. In fact, there's an ancient word for them that goes back to the times that the Hebrews were wandering the desert. They called them the Erev Rav, and they're the sort of Jews who kind of like screw with people, can't mind their own business, and give all the Jews a bad name. And yeah, they've always been a problem. I mean, Marx, from what I understand, was also rejected from his Jewish community. He died a penniless loser, constantly had to
Yeah,
beg his
he
friends for money.
rejected the religious aspects of Judaism because he was obviously an atheist. Like even Trotsky did, a lot of them did. Most of them are taking kind of the interpretation of the Talmud, which is kind of different than the Torah. Because like I know like ultra Orthodox Jews like still follow the Torah, whereas like most Jews nowadays don't. They follow the Talmud. Uh, Most of the people in the Soviet Union, including Marx, way back then, followed the secular take on Judaism. So they thought they were fulfilling the values of what Judaism actually is by creating like a secular kind of like international system.
Well, yeah, I mean, the original founding of Israel was by the secular Zionist movement. Very different from like the nationalist religious movement. So, I mean, the two
Isn't
are
the
always.
religious movement that's nationalistic in Israel, isn't there like a even smaller radical group that's like anti against the state of Israel existing?
Yeah, those people are worthless losers. They're called Haredim, and they're not based. They're only against Israel because in their useless ideology, they only believe in praying and studying all day long, and they believe that Israel should have been founded by a miracle of God and not by, the conventional method. So they're sitting on their ass waiting for God to rescue them. And because he didn't, and other people went off and founded the state of Israel before, God could come and do it, they're butthurt about that. So they oppose Israel for those reasons. But they don't love Goyim. They don't love Palestinians. In fact, they probably hate them the most.
What would you say about people who would argue the formation of Israel had to come from international bodies, and because it didn't come from God, it's illegitimate, and because of those international bodies being involved, it's inherently satanic, which is actually something that you hear from some Christians.
And wait, before you answer, AC, could you bring your face a little closer to the microphone since some of our guests are having trouble, or some of the listeners are having trouble hearing you?
I will do that.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so if I understood the question correctly, it's more like since it wasn't founded by like God or whatever, it's illegitimate.
Yeah, so like some Christians, for example, argue because the state wasn't created by God, it was destroyed by God, and since it wasn't given to them by God again, it was created by these international bodies. It's illegitimate and it's satanic because it wasn't endowed by God, but by groups like the United Nations, for example.
My whole take on that is that Jews have had a problem over the past couple thousands of years waiting for God to do all the work, and they believe in, just if I study Torah all day, God will take care of me, and they don't get off their ass and do anything. This is a large part of why I walked away from Judaism because I don't subscribe to that mentality at all. I'm not atheist. I mean, I'm not particularly religious. I'm not atheist, but I do believe that God wants us to go forth and make our own way in this world, and that the fact that when they finally decided to take up arms and establish a state themselves and eventually succeeded at it, whereas they spent the past couple thousand years praying for it and with no results, I mean, that kind of speaks for itself. I
Like, what
think
if
that,
the reason it was never established in the first place is because they rejected God? That's the question that a lot of Christians make, is because they killed Christ, they rejected God. That's why their state's illegitimate, and they can never have a state.
I mean, you could argue that if you're a Christian. I'm not really a Christian.
Well,
I'm
I'm
not
just saying that's
exactly.
what some Christians believe. Like, I'm not practicing Christian. I know, like, Anon is. I don't know what his views are, but
I
Uh,
mean, look, that's fine from a Christian perspective, but again, if you're talking about me and my beliefs, I think that if you're not willing to take up arms and establish a state yourself, you don't deserve it. You basically want the religious version of welfare. You want God to hand you a nation. He never even did that, by the way, with Israel originally. Like God could have used a thunderbolt or whatever and smote all the Canaanites, but
well,
he actually made them
yeah, he
conquer the
ordered you
city of
guys to go
Jericho.
like kill all of them.
He ordered them to go to war, and they took casualties. Why? Because God's like, look, after the desert, I'm you people are going to get to rely on miracles, and I do not want that. Like he basically put an end to that after the time of Moses. He's like, you guys got to learn how to fend for yourselves. At this
I
point,
mean,
you're just getting pathetic.
yeah, and it's really following in line with well, how God has relationship has been with the Jews, because if you look at people like King Saul, or King Jehu from Second Kings, like they were all commanded to go out and conquer in the name of God. Like they had to go kill the Baal worshippers. They had
Christian
to go.
jihad.
Well, you could. Well, but this is like Old Testament, so
I
like
know
you
This is
Christian
could.
base
jihad.
jihad.
Yeah, it's Hebrew and it's Christian later on, but yeah.
Judeo
Judeo-Christian? What? No.
the Judeo Bolshevik king of.
So, because they went after pagans, what would you say to the pagans then who argue that because of this link right here of like Christianity having Jewish roots, specifically right here, uh, what would you say to pagans who argue that Christianity is just Judaism, then it's bad for Western civilization?
I
Like, what's
mean,
your
it
what's your
kind.
views?
I
Because they consider it like a modern form of Judaism.
Well, the modern Christian church, I mean, again, this is coming from someone. I was born and raised Christian, but now I'm an outsider. But I kind of see the modern church being subverted in a lot of ways. They're teaching more an emphasis on liberal values than they are on Christian values. Because if you read the Bible, there's no two ways about it. It is not a liberal document. But you have a lot of these left-wing pastors who are going like, well, Jesus just wanted you to love gay people and smoke pot all day and just love everyone and be vaguely nice to people. That's what the Bible wants. No, they literally executed people for adultery back then. So like modern Christianity, they need to work to put an end to this bastardization of their ideology and their religion that's being perpetrated by these people who are mocking their religion.
So, do you
Because
think Zionism as like a concept, like an evangelical Christianity, is kind of something that was inserted in as a subversion to kind of like break Christianity?
I think that the modern Christian church suffers from the same problem democracy does, where you know they are at this point they're just pandering to get as many people in their doors as possible, and they're setting aside all their core ideologies because of it, and pretending that their original founding fathers believe something a lot different than what they actually believe. And it's why democracy won't work, and it's why the modern church won't work. I don't really view Zionism as the cause so much as a symptom.
Well,
Like,
yeah.
it,
Well, Zionism is kind of like a more frequent thing that appeared. Part of like the Jewish antagonism towards Christianity for a long time is because of their anti-Semitism, specifically among like Protestants who would stand people like Martin Luther to Catholics who would accuse them of deicide, for example. As as far as like stuff goes with like evangelicals, a lot of them believe that like because Israel and like Jews are God's chosen people, you must support Israel to get God's blessing, and if you don't support Israel, you've turned your back on God, for example. That's what they typically believe. That's why you have things like they support APAC, or they frequently give donations to stuff involving Israel.
Or they make pilgrimages to Israel a lot.
Yeah, like my great grandmother was like a Methodist. She had like holy water. It was like blessed in Jerusalem.
Oh, speaking of which, like my great grandma, who actually was in Germany during World War II, after the end of the war, like she actually became a bit of a Zionist herself. Like she made like frequent pilgrimages to Israel, and she considered. I remember reading like one of her like books. She said, "I consider myself, internally Jewish." Even though, yeah, but like that my great grand, like apparently like this stuff goes back too, like this, like almost as soon as like the end of World War II, and like in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, you had a lot of these Christians like start just heading out to Israel, and like paying a lot of lip service to Israel as well.
yeah, that was a big part of the church I used to go to. Is they would have a night to honor Israel, and they would invite all these rabbis into the church. It always kind of felt weird, you
Whoa,
know?
that's crazy. I never.
Because a lot of the super churches or like the evangelical movement's very heavily intertwined with APAC, and a lot of them actually receive small money donations, wink, wink, from these organizations because it keeps them on a bankroll. Uh, as far as like other stuff goes, how do Jews view pagans, for example? Because I like in the Old Testament, there's various cases of them like exterminating pagans. A lot of pagans don't like Christians because they view Christianity as like an extension of Judaism.
So Jews do hate pagans. In fact, there's a commandment. There's something called the 613 mitzvahs, which are 600. They're not exactly commandments, but it's a list of things like, hey, it would be good if you did this. And one of the 613 mitzvahs is to mock idol worship and to humiliate people who engage in idol worship. So
So yeah, mocking and humiliating people who worship idols. So like
So like chop down their idols,
yeah,
use
like the
the
great
logs.
trees, for
Yeah,
example, stuff like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
yeah, like make a mockery out of it, make light of it, and of course, idolatry and paganism was punishable by death in biblical law.
Yeah, I think paganism is kind of gross
What
too.
what is what is Judaism's views on homosexuality? Because I know Israel is like one of the biggest places that homosexuals make a pilgrimage to in the Middle East.
Tel
Whereas like
Aviv.
yeah, I know. Whereas
Right.
like Christians have always historically been anti-homosexual, and as far as pagans, if we're talking like Germanic pagans, they would drown gays in the local river.
So again, like, and I want to caveat everything I've said up until now. You're asking me Judaism's view on this and that. They aren't my views, all right? But I'm just telling you quite frankly, what they think.
Of
Like when we
course.
have a conversation about, Jesus, I don't particularly have any animosity towards him or anyone who believes in him. And I frankly think the idea that, he would be in any sort of hell when is ridiculous. But again, going back to what you said, what is Judaism's opinion of the gays? Well, it goes back to what I said earlier, where this kind of infection that is set foot in the United States is also set foot in Israel. And
Well, I think
according to
like 47% identify as like bisexual or something.
well, yeah, because so look, in ancient biblical law, there's no two ways about it. It actually says in the Hebrew version of the Torah, a man who lies with another man, as he would lay with a woman, is an abomination before God and has to be put to death. That's a classic Jewish take on it.
Leviticus
However,
18:22. Yeah.
there you go. Yeah, that loaded up and ready to go. But but again, like the sort of like neoliberal, sickness is also taking hold in Israel. So Tel Aviv, I was not kidding when I said it's the San Francisco of the Middle East, basically, where there I think one of the top three gayest cities in the world is San Francisco, Amsterdam, and Tel Aviv, right there. So it's got all of the SJWs there. It's got all the gays. It's got all the degenerate like sort of nightclubs where people do like the most unspeakable things. And the whole city, by the way, smells like a litter box because refugees are just shitting and pissing and all over the streets there. It's literally like I've been there, dude. It's nowhere you want to be.
By the
That's
way,
pretty interesting.
one question I had, and I think you've told me a bit about this before. Israel actually has a very good policy when it comes to pornography. Can you tell us a bit about that?
I mean, look, I'm no academic site, so I've never really tried to look up, oh, who made this porn? I want to know their names. I want to know who directed this amazing porn.
You have to kind of like sign up for the pornography through the ISP. Is that right?
Oh, you're talking. Sorry, I misheard you. So you're talking about the actual laws?
Yes, I'm talking about the
Yeah.
laws.
For some reason in my head, I guess I was half listening. I thought you were asking me to go into the history of Jews and pornography.
No.
There's a pretty big there's a lot of books on that, especially with Hollywood in America.
Oh
Yeah.
that's
All
not
right.
the Israelis, but
So okay. Yeah, there's an actual law they're trying to pass. So here's what's going on in Israel, by the way. Demographics are king now in Israel because it's such a small country and so sensitive demographically that any sort of tidal shift in demographics are going to really kind of fuck with who's in charge there. So at first, like I said, the founders of Israel were largely Russian communists, but none of these secular communist Jews are having any kids. They're maybe having maybe two a pop. That's it. The people having all the kids are the Dati Lomi, the Haredi, and the Muslims. They're having all the kids. So is
I know
secular?
Netanyahu was trying to build a coalition to stay in with some of the Muslims, which kind of pissed off some of the other more radical nationalist groups that wanted to do like Greater Israel and all that.
Yeah, Bibi. At this point, I'm pretty sick of his shit. Uh, he's gotten quite. I've gotten sick of him. Like, of course, when I was in the IDF, he was still, in charge, and a lot of stuff was happening under his watch, which directly contradicted everything he was saying. And he very much will talk out of one side of his mouth and act a completely different way. That's Bibi Netanyahu. So he very much is like a politician, but on not getting ahead of myself. What's going on in Israel is the Dati Lomi are having a lot of more kids, and the radio are having a lot more kids. So the religious politics are actually becoming more and more of a big player in Israel, and the secular liberals are losing. Their demographics are being destroyed because they don't have kids. These liberals don't have kids, and now it's getting to the point where they're ready to ban porn. They're ready to, you know, ban degeneracy, and this is a result of the shift in demographics. So now, um, if you want porn, you actually have to talk to your internet provider and have it enabled. But it's it's not there on the internet for just any kid to stumble across, which may not be such a bad thing.
So what is like the Jewish views on Greater Israel? Because like one of the views on why Israel gets us involved in a lot of these Middle Eastern countries and doing like lots of dumb shit, destabilizing them, is that they're working with these groups to try and create Greater Israel.
I would say, look, if I were to tell you that there is no movement to expand Israel's borders, I'd be lying to you. There is. There's there's something called the ancient kingdom of Israel was included much of Jordan and some of the Sinai, I think. So there are the Datilomi in particular, the religious nationalists. They want to go back to the ancient kingdom of Israel, which included most of Jordan. Now, as for conflicts in like I don't know Afghanistan, Iraq, I've never known Israel to have particular interest in those countries. I think that what Israel's ambitions are is probably more towards, if you were to be very generous, probably the ancient borders of Israel. But it's mostly like a kind of smaller faction that thinks like that. I haven't heard like big league politicians get on board with that. And on top of that, even within Israel's own borders, it can't really control what's going on. It's got all the pockets of Palestinian authority. I mean, it gave back Gaza, it gave back the Sinai Peninsula, it gave back control of the Temple Mount to the Jordanian Waqf. So I'm just not seeing any like big time colonialism on Israel's part. Like sometimes I kind of wish it was as based as they claim it is, because Israel is actually pretty darn cucked when it comes to a lot of things, to be honest. They're infected by like this, liberalism and stuff like that. Like they're nowhere near as based as you think they are. Or I'm not you particularly, but some of these people think, Israel's like this big, scary colonial power, and it's kind of cucked, actually.
Well, one thing I think is kind of funny, like in America, is like a lot of the liberals or like a lot of the Jews in America are kind of like against us having any like legislation to close our borders or have like any restrictive policies on immigration at all. And but if you talk about Israel, they're for Israel staying like majority Jewish and having closed borders, but they're not for that for the United States.
So to be honest, like I said, for a long time, refugees were actually just pouring into Israel, and the liberals were loving it until the Israeli prime minister said, "Hey, look, any refugees that come in, that's fine. We're just going to round them up and send them to Tel Aviv, so you all can live with them if you want them that bad." And yeah, sure enough, I was doing. Me and my commander were kind of in an unmarked car there undercover, and we were driving around downtown Tel Aviv, and my commander's like, "Wait a minute, is this Israel? Did we just drive all the way down to Africa?" Because you looked outside, that's all you saw is like these degenerates just sitting in the middle of the road, not doing anything.
Well, I
Like
know
it
during the
felt
refugee crisis, where we had all of the people from like Africa and the Middle East like going to Europe, Israel was actually helping them go into Europe, which was like a thing that people brought up, how Israel wasn't taking them themselves; they were just sending them all to Europe to deal with it.
I mean, if someone like me were running the show, I'd send them straight back to where they came from. But I don't get a say in this, and there's a lot of sick shit that goes on, and the leaders that are in Europe seem to want it to happen. It's not like Israel's forcing them to accept refugees, but people like Angela Merkel actually threaten to sanction other European countries that don't take in refugees. So it's like I said, all these leaders are in on it. It's not like Israel's literally forcing everybody to do its will. It's that we have this corrupt group of politicians and CEOs who all kind of cooperate with each other to do this sick shit. But yeah, I mean, look, Israel is actually not quite as close borders as some people thought it is, but they did do something called they built what they call the apartheid wall. I mean, Israel doesn't call that, the left wingers call it that. But there was a series.
I know they were a very big supporter of the people against apartheid, and they were also pretty big supporters of Rhodesia too. I know that.
Huh. So basically, there was a period in Israel called the Intifada. During this time, crime was at an all-time high. There were lots of bus bombings, terrorist attacks. There was grand theft auto on a pretty regular basis until Israel decided to build a big, giant concrete wall separating their territories from the Palestinian territories, and crime went down by a lot, and the daily bombing stopped. So walls work.
Well, I guess the Democrats are debunked there.
Well, and here's the thing:
Israel proves it.
Israel has small borders. I think I had another conversation with Senator Dan on. I told him if we wanted to fix the refugee crisis, a lot of it could be solved not even by building a giant wall, but if we just got rid of all their incentives to come over here. Like if we
I
had no
know,
wealth.
like Richard Spencer, which I don't know if you're aware of who he is.
I
Are
know
you?
who he is. Yeah, I
Yeah,
know who he is.
yeah. He used to call himself a white Zionist because he kind of wanted the same policies that Israel has, but for white people only, like the anti-miscegenation laws, the welfare systems, the state bureaucracy, putting the people first, and all that.
Yeah, I think I'd be lying if I said I agree with everything he says, because I don't like welfare at all, not even for white people, but I just think it makes people weak past a certain point. That community should handle the welfare aspect rather than the state. But that's just my personal belief. But least of all, other fucking countries, for crying out loud. I mean, we're just handing out money left and right to all these different countries, and Israel's no exception, and that needs to stop today.
One question I have for you, and this is a little different, but would you say that Israel is more culturally intact than America is?
It depends. Like, okay, so the religious nationalists, they're living the lives that all the people on the right want to live. They like you walk into one of their communities, you're going to see all the guys walking around with assault rifles. It's very family oriented. Like all the children know each other, all the families know each other. It's very intimate. Their communities are gated off, so outsiders are not welcome. And it's very kind of like religious and sort of like quote unquote based. So the
Mhm.
religious nationalist, our movement I was exposed to while I was there, they're more like patriotic kind of right-wing stereotypes, and there's a big emphasis on farming and being
Is there
connected.
a fascist movement in Israel? Like an actual like fascist movement?
I mean, define like fascist. Is it like
So like they're radically nationalistic, but they have kind of like an anti-capitalist and also like anti-communist rhetoric. They might be anti-Arab too, I guess.
well, you might call the Datiloni that. They're very like, return to the land. They despise the communists, but at the same time they're very community based. And they are called fascist by a lot of the left wingers in Israel. Except, of course, they find that quite hilarious because they're Jews, so they don't see themselves, of course, as the typical fascist that people picture. But they're called that by
Well,
the
I
left.
mean, the same thing could be said about like Dollfuss, who was like an Austrian Catholic. He was an anti-Nazi, but he was a fascist. At least that's what people call him. Because he followed like the same economic system as like Mussolini and everything, and the same similar state bureaucracy. He's also a manlet, but that's another point.
I see
As
someone in the chat. He says, Bubbles, maybe this is too scandalous for YouTube, but ask him his thoughts on the Holocaust and deniers. I'm actually pretty open to the idea of discussing it. Like, of course, there's the Spurgs who just want to, be Spurgy, but like, hey, if you want to say it was like, not 6 million, I mean, I'm not gonna cry about
well,
it. I mean,
even revisionists like David Cole, his real name is David Stein. He was actually a Jewish man who did a documentary where he went into Auschwitz and he looked at the camp very closely, worked with some other people who were looking into this, and including some forensic people and scientists, and they concluded that maybe only 1 million people died during the Holocaust. And he got a lot of attacks from the Jewish community and a lot of vitriol thrown at him to the point where he
but
just kind
see,
of disappeared.
this is part of the reason again why I kind of walked away from all that. I'm like, why would you want that to be true? The people who are getting offended when you question the Holocaust, it's like, why would you want that to be true? Like, why
Hmm.
would you want to have been a bigger victim? Why are you offended? They're literally offended at the idea that less of them died. They want to live in a reality where more of them died. That's
Hmm.
weird, right?
Well, the so like the main argument that you're going to hear from like Cole is that at most 300,000 of them were killed through like gunning and gassing, whereas like the rest of it that makes up the million tally is from things like typhus, starvation, allied bombing, stuff like
I
that.
mean, I can buy that. I'm
Yeah.
not opposed to that. I think that's totally possible. Like, people don't talk about how during the Civil War, a lot of people died in these prisoner camps, and they weren't, concentration camps in the sense that they were intentionally being killed. But when you put people in those conditions, disease breaks out. Thousands and thousands of people die. And I know about the old oven meme, like you can't bake 6 million cookies,
Yeah, Cookie Monster.
which is also kind of like retarded because I don't think anyone made the argument that 6 million Jews were actually put in the actual ovens. It's just a general rule of, okay, who died of disease, who died of, in the trenches, who died in the mass graves. I don't think I've heard anyone say, oh, 6 million Jews were actually cremated. But yeah, look, if you want to talk about, I think Jews, this is another problem I have, is Jews placing like this cultural significance in like the Holocaust
Oh,
as
I could bring this up real quick. You ever heard of a documentary called Defamation?
maybe not. No, I don't.
It was made by a Jewish man, and he basically documented how they foster like the cultural militarism of Israel and kind of like the nationalistic stuff through the education system for when they do mandatory enlistment. Uh, One of the things they would do is they take groups of students and they make them go to Auschwitz, for example, and they have like a liaison who's actually a member of the Israeli like military, a person who's of the Mossad, and then they have a verified Jewish person from the country, so Germany, who
Sounds
just
like hell.
who goes around and tells them about the whole thing. And the point in the movie Defamation showed that they were using the Holocaust to foster resentment and hatred of outsiders to kind of justify what the Israeli state does to people.
So when I was in Israel, there's this, of course, Israel has a Holocaust museum, and it's this big, huge facility called Yad Vashem, and you basically are mandatory. You have to see it. So when I went to the school, I saw it several times, not just once. And then when I was in the army, I had to go there several times, not just once. I'm like, can we stop talking about the fucking Holocaust already? I'm sick and tired. Like one tour was enough of this museum. Why do I have to go on like six? Can we like they just want to talk about it all the time, all the time, all the time? Like, why would you want to talk about how you got beasted on? Like that's
So one thing that you've told me before is that like also Jews love to kind of like incorporate their victimization into their culture. Can you go into that?
so.
That's talked about by Kevin McDonald and the Culture of Critique. That's a pretty good read, by the way. He's an academic, and he was basically showing how their culture is like highly nepotistic and kind of narcissistic and entitled, following like a type of victimhood.
So again, you're talking about the diaspora Judaism, the modern nationalist religious Jews kind of moved away from all that. They have no interest in talking about the Holocaust or what other people owe them. But again, they're a small part of the religious Jews. I think they're the strongest part of Israeli culture. They're turning out to be the backbone. But yeah, the Haredi Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, the European Jews, they pretty much have a culture centered around victimhood and trying to live off other people because they spent so much time without a nation that they don't really have this mentality of being tied to the land. They have a sort of survival mentality of, well, I'm just going to get whatever I can out of my host nation and try to survive that way, but I could really care less what happens to everyone else. And that's something that needs to be um, stricken out of Judaism completely. But it's one of the most unattractive aspects of Judaism, in my opinion, is the fact that, not just the Holocaust itself, but all the different sorts of, instances where they got kicked out of like, what was it, 109 countries? I know that.
Mm-hmm.
But
What's your thoughts on like National Socialists, Nazis, or just like fascists broadly?
I mean, what was it? Someone famous once said, he's like, don't quit calling, all these people the Nazis because the more you do, the cooler they seem. Now, I'm not associated with, third position or anything like that. Like I said, I'm more of like, I'm in the realm of like, sort of like the Aaron Clarys or the sort of like more libertarian guys. In my ideal world, we can all pursue our own lifestyles, sort up to a certain extent. I just don't. I kind of resent like people telling me I need to participate in their vision of what they want my life to look like. And that's a big reason why I hate communists, is because communism requires my unwilling participation. So if you want to go off, like if you want to have, like, I don't know, like a fascist commune or something like that, I actually wouldn't really care. But it's when it gets to the state level that I start going, like, I'm just naturally against welfare and all that.
So this is probably a big one right here. So like there's people like Stryker, for example, have done some work on this. So like libertarianism, broadly speaking, Milton Friedman, Rothbard, Ayn Rand, all Jews. So what would you say that they're saying that you like you don't necessarily have to like agree with how I'm going to ask this, but a lot of people would frame it in that you're promoting individualism just like other Jews do, to basically not have people identify with ethnos or like the nation as a whole, so they only think of themselves as individuals. What would you say about that?
I mean, I can only talk about my own personal worldview, where I never I don't identify so much with other people based on skin color. I identify with people based on ideology. So, like, I would rather hang out with someone who, was right wing but not necessarily white, than hang out with a white liberal from like New York. You know what I'm saying? Like the fact that, it's look, is it nice when like a neighborhood is majority white? I mean, some of the best neighborhoods are. But I think there's a lot more importance on like ideology, like I like, and something like ethnicity, I guess. Like, people say race isn't important, but what they don't realize is ethnicity kind of actually is. So there is something to be said about, having some sort of ethnic pride. Like I said, I consider myself a proud, Southern person. Um, and I do believe you should take steps to make sure that your demographics are going to be, protected. But at the same time, I don't think race is the end all be all. I don't think like it's worth basing like so many policies over. But then again, I'm not an academic type. I don't spend all my days kind of musing about these things. I'm more of like a field guy. I kind of like, just kind of like living my life, and you know, telling other people to fuck off when they try to tell me what to do.
Would you say Mr. Krabs is the pinnacle of the Jewish community?
Mr. Krabs, I hate Jewish people. Squidward, they make the most money.
Oh my god.
Mr. Krabs with a capital K.
You gotta talk like Mr. Krabs from now on.
Yeah.
Can you do like one of those like New York Jewish accents? Because like majority of New York's like it's like almost Jewish. It's like 40%.
You call this a bagel? Oh, it hasn't really got any poppy seeds in it.
Oh my god.
I know it's the South, but do we really have to not have air conditioner?
Fucking done.
all those New York Jews, they're all like European Jews, right?
Pretty much. It's
yeah.
like it's literally the same people. Like, that's where they settle. It's like where the whole like Ashkenazi movement came from, and like, yeah, they're mostly European Jews.
There is a big question. People like George Lincoln Rockwell, leader of the American Nazi Party, has said in an interview before that Jews are members of the white race. Do Jews identify as a part of the white race?
What? Okay, that's a new one to me.
Yeah, Mr. Rockwell, I have a clip of him. He says during an interview, the reporter goes, "Do you consider Jews members of the white race?" And he says, "Why, of course I do."
Do you think that Jews are white, AC?
It's kind of difficult to say, because it depends. Like, you got people like me that it's not, because I had this debate with
do Jews who have light skin with some European heritage identify as white?
I mean, I guess they they
It's
when
like the
I call
meme
them,
is normally saying that I, as a fellow white person, then when somebody brings that up, they say I am a Jewish person. I am not white. I'm pretty sure you've seen the memes.
yeah, they like to shapeshift. So here's the thing, right? Like you have people, because I was debating someone about this exact thing, and they were calling me, they're saying I'm not white, but I'm like, well, what about when I was born and raised Christian, and before I converted, was I white then? And then I lost my white card when I converted to Judaism. Is that how that works? And they're like, no one converts to Judaism. That's not a thing. And but here's the thing, like, okay, so there's race and there's ethnicity, and this is why I believe ethnicity is more important than race, because you have people who are quote unquote white, but they have very different genetics. Like, a white person from, Georgia is nowhere near the same as a quote unquote, white Jew from Poland. And they don't even look the same. They don't share like any of these basic genetics. So
Well, it's because like a lot of say like white nationalists, kind of like Dugan, follow this thing called ethno pluralism. So they believe like there's civilizational things, and these civilizational aspects have like a core concepts of like Western civilization. It's race, but the problem of ethno pluralism is it's actually anti-historical because we can actually look at religious difference. Sunnis and Shia hate each other, but they're a part of the same civilizational area, the Arab world. Or we could look in Europe, the Balkans, very white people, but they hate each other over cultural and slight ethnic differences. These are just more modern phenomenons that are kind of created and put forward. And you kind of see idiots like Dugan put that forward, like a lot of white nationalists, is because they're following ontological liberalism, and they're not actually looking at what human nature is. And human nature is friend enemy distinction as Schmidt understood it. So it's all negation against the out group, be it religious or ethnic to a slight degree. And it's about a nation having supremacy over all other groups, which is what I would be more interested in if like a new American nation having a monopoly over all other nations. But it's probably an extreme take, though.
yeah, look, I mean, the reason why I never put too much stock in like race per se is because like I see like a bunch of white people doing stupid shit all the time. Like how many times have you seen like white Karens out there just doing stupid shit? It's like I don't want to like have anything in common with these people. Also, like all these white liberals in New York and San
Oh, I have a
Francisco.
question, actually. What's your thoughts on the Talmud where it talks about goyim, which means non-Jewish people can be Jews' slaves, and that they're not even worth 1,000 goyim aren't worth the fingernail on a single Jew?
Well, of course, I'm against it, but at the same time, I don't. That was never a prominent teaching that I heard. The term goy is literally from the Hebrew word for like, from what
Means
I understand.
non-Jew or barbarian.
Well, it comes from a word meaning the goyim is like the nations. It translates into the nations. It became kind of derogatory just because of the connotation, kind of like how saying the literally the Latin term negro, grew to be perceived negatively by blacks, even though it's just the literal Spanish word for black. Um, that's kind of like what happened with the word goyim. And I've met some Jews who do believe that the vast majority of Jews I've been around do not push
Yeah,
that.
there was actually an interview with a Jew. It was like a rabbi who was screaming at the guy, saying that you're below me, you're my slave, you're a million of you aren't worth my life, stuff like that.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm sure Jews have been caught saying reprehensible things, and you can find other clips of other people saying reprehensible things. I mean, I don't think it's stock standard of what the average Jew believes. I mean, this idea, again, look, am I going to sit here and say that none of the Jews think this way? No. Um, but I don't think your average Jew is as out to get America as people seem to think. I mean,
Mhm.
we are dealing with a lot of subversion and sicknesses in modern America, but like it's not like Yankel, the deli shop owner, who's actively doing it. Like I just think people are kind of like losing sight of what the actual problem is,
Hey,
and they think.
Anon, there's a question from a guy called Man. Sorry if I interrupted you. Look at that question though and ask him after he's done.
Yeah,
Asking
yeah,
about the
continue.
Noahide
Okay.
laws.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So there
actually.
are seven. There are seven Noahide laws, and I'm going to forget some of them. Uh, but they're basically the Jews. The Jews actually do teach you don't have to be Jewish to go to heaven or anything like that. You can, but you do at the very minimum, according to them, have to keep the seven Noahide laws. And Noah, it was named after Noah, from Noah's Ark. He was not considered to be Jewish, as you know. Abraham was, considered the founder of Judaism. Noah was just, a guy, and but he did live by the seven Noahide principles. I can't remember all of them, but they were pretty basic, like, don't murder for no reason, don't steal for no reason. One of them was actually, do not eat the limb off of a living animal, meaning if you're going to eat meat, kill the animal mercifully, don't eat it alive. Those are three of the seven Noahide laws. It's been too long. I forget the other ones, but
So it's probably good. It's probably a good question. It's probably more of a troll question, but is kosher slaughter humane?
not in my opinion. Um, it's a lot of people will tell you it is. I've seen it. I participated in it. I used to work closely with a kosher butcher. I've seen the process from the beginning to the end. And in my opinion, there's much more humane ways to kill an animal, much more.
Uh,
But because Jews push a big emphasis on following tradition for the sake of the tradition, once it's done for a certain amount of time, that's the only way they'll do it. So they're not going to hear you when you even push like, hey, like, can't we just, I don't know, have like a special gun that just shoots them in the head and kills them immediately? They'll still insist on doing it the kosher way, which is, slitting the throat with a special knife that's supposed to be extremely sharp and not have any nicks or scratches in it whatsoever. And it has to be one swipe.
what's your thoughts on most American food and products having kosher symbols on it, and then it being withdrawn as a tax that goes to Israel?
I didn't know about the withdrawn as a tax to Israel part, but if it when it comes to a lot of kosher products in the United States, it kind of functions almost like a mob because it's basically these companies having to pay off these rabbis to do business with the Jewish community. So any company that wants to sell their products in the Jewish community has to have what's called a hechsher on it, which is like a certain kind of symbol. Now, certain people give different credences to the different symbols. Some people will say that Circle K is not good enough. You have to have OU. Some people say standalone U is not enough. You have to. So there's many different hechsher's and symbols, and different Jews will subscribe themselves to different hechsher's. And in Israel, oh my God, it's even worse. Like they won't eat the food unless a specific rabbi gave his okay on it. So it almost gets political with all the different hechsher's. Like, oh well, that's not really kosher because it was certified by that faction. We don't talk to those guys. There's actually one of my favorite Jewish jokes, right? They find this Jewish guy on an island, right? And he had built for himself three synagogues. And they asked him, like, why'd you build three synagogues if it was just you on the island? And he said, well, the first synagogue I go to on the weekdays, the second is for special holidays, and that third synagogue I will never set foot into. And it's sort of like a joke, like no matter what, like these Jewish factions like to squabble with each other. So that's why you have like 1,000 different hechshers. I gotta tell you a funny story real quick that happened to me. This was hilarious. One
Yes.
time my sister came up to me and she was crying, and I'm like, what happened? And she's like, well, that guy over there, he was flirting with me and he found out I was Jewish, so he grabbed my arm. He's like, can I have your number? I don't know if you get it.
Yeah, I'm getting the question a lot, so I'm actually asked to why I said Ukrainians deserve the Holodomor.
No.
Yeah, I'm
I
going to
don't know.
answer
Like
it. I'm
Oh
going
you
to
don't
answer
need
no.
to
it.
give these. You don't need to give these retards the time of day. They are the spurgiest of spurg. They are a niche corner of the internet.
Well, even some of the Christians on Telegram have been attacking me for saying that. So like, okay, so my view is that
People are going to forget about it in a couple weeks, dude. Just let it blow
yeah,
over.
yeah, my view is as far as like genocide goes, any type of genocide is justified no matter what type of genocide it was. And that's because when a government has the authority and the legal process to have power over you, it can destroy you any way you want. And if you're not able to take the power away from it, and you deserve to be destroyed any way possible. We have examples of this happening with the Jews and being destroyed by Rome. We have examples of this of Turkey destroying the Armenians, the Ukrainians from the Russians, or the Germans with Poles. I don't really care about the moral fag argument here because people who moralize this are ignoring what real politics is, and real politics is about supremacy, domination, and expansion and extermination. It has been like that since prehistoric era, and it has been like that to the present. And anybody who wants to say you can't say that Ukrainians are white, well, I'm sorry, you're a retard who doesn't understand what real politics is. Real politics will always be slavery, extermination, genocide, subjugation, and empire.
If you don't stand up for your rights, you don't have them. Like it's the same thing with if you don't fight for your rights, they don't exist. You can write whatever you want on paper, but if you're not going to stand up for what you believe in, you might as well not have those rights. It's like on paper, you have the right to say whatever you want, but if you think you can just walk around New York screaming the N-word, like unless you're willing to fight for that right physically, you don't really have that right because someone's going to try to knock you out.
Yep. Besides that, people have been bringing up me saying I identify as like left, closer to Stalin too. Well, like I'm sorry,
My favorite
take a political compass test. Like most people in this movement are going to get authoritarian left and like who identify as a fascist or national socialist. I don't
my
like
favorite
Stalin.
is
I would
when
like to see Lenin and Mao's like graves completely destroyed, but that's never going to happen.
My
Right.
favorite is when you said they called you a Judeo Bolshevik.
Yeah, Judea Bolshevik. Yeah, that was,
That was just hilarious because you don't look. Once in a while, we all got to step back and put things in perspective. Very few people in the normal, sane, real world, unironically throw around the term Judeo Bolshevik or whatever. It's like you're dealing with like basically spurgs who don't have lives. I promise you that. Like these people are probably they don't have any
this is probably
interpersonal
gonna get
relationship.
clipped saying a Jew agrees with Zoltanous.
There you go. There you
Just
go.
saying.
It's like, and again, again, it's Spurs being Spurs because, they want to paint it as like, oh, a Jew agrees with Zoltanus. Like, I'm not exactly your typical Zio weird Jew,
I mean,
Like,
like
come on.
I've had people. I hate it. For example, when Germans moralize like Dresden or like modern day like National Socialists, it's like who cares? Like the British got grooming gangs. Celebrate them getting raped for doing Dresden. Like what the fuck do I care?
Like it's funny. Like AC here actually had a German friend in his IDF unit that he actually cried about like Dresden with. They got totally smashed and cried about that.
Oh, yeah,
Jesus
that is a
Christ.
funny story. We got really drunk one time and decided to cry about how what happened to Germany at the end of World War II.
In Israel. In
I found out a really cool tactic to frighten people in Israel is to make believe that I talk German and to shout it at them. And so whenever I was like really pissed at people, I would do it and it would get me looks every time. I'd be like, like to scream like that at them. And one time I did that on the bus on our way to a shooting range. And my I just stood up in the aisle, go, and my sergeant was just like, I do not appreciate you imitating a Nazi soldier. I'm like, oh no, I'm imitating a German soldier. It's okay.
That's hilarious. I mean, we're already on this for 2 hours.
Yeah, I was thinking it's about time to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Angry Cowboy, it was wonderful having you on. I really appreciate, and I'm sure all of our viewers appreciate the introspective into Judaism and Israel and some of the IDF
what makes it
stories.
weirder is he's not actually Jewish too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because some people say I'm not really Jewish, and then other people say I'm Jewish, and I will always be Jewish. And like me, I don't really identify with any of that anymore. I'm
Yeah,
just
you're
kinda doing my
basically
own-
forced into it by your parents. So
Oh well, life goes on.
probably get to this. Is there any chat like that we're sending? Chat questions?
Unfortunately, we do not have
Okay.
any
That's fine.
actually. When is your conversion ceremony, Zoltanous?
Oh no, God, no.
Yeah, when are we going to strip you naked in front of the rabbi, Zoltanous?
No, that's not happening. Not happening. I'm not being abducted. Not joining the lizard people.
And if any of the feds are listening, everything I said was satire. I am not a danger to the community.
Yep. The Stormcloak Rebellion will go off without a hitch.
Well, yeah, that was good, guys. I'm gonna end it right now. All right, good
right.
night, everyone.
All right.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Leatrot.
Oh God.
And let's see. I think is it ended yet?
It's still